There you go. Hello, testing 1, 2. We're off and running. Cool. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Last meeting before Christmas. Number 5 chocolate this morning. With apologies from councillors Clark, Pearson, Wilson, and Nelson, and substituted by Maxter, Runciman, Melly, and Merritt. Good old numbers up, really, shouldn't we? Housekeeping, you all know where the toilets are, and if there's an emergency, out we go, because it's not expected. Declaration of interest, have we any? Hey, going well. Minutes, Reese. Next meeting, not quite written. Reese said it was a busy month, so deferred to the next meeting. Unless anybody's got anything desperate they can remember that they want to bring up from the last meeting. Oh, public participation. We have one. Chris Hoyle. Are you? Yes, Chris Hoyle is here. Welcome. 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes, Chris. You press the one that says Nick. Yes.
Like that. Lovely. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Chris Hoyle. I'm your child. That means I grew up in foster care. And that means that you're my parents, you're my corporate parents. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my child. So my child is Oscar, and Oscar's about to turn 4, and I believe he's watching us online. He's your grandchild. My wife is very, very imminently going to be bringing our second child into the world. In the life of Oscar, I have received exactly 0 practical support from my parents in bringing Oscar up. And I choose to keep Oscar away from his biological grandparents for reasons that should be obvious to you. I know that many of you are parents, and you'll understand how hard of a job that can be in the best of circumstances. I hope you won't understand how difficult that can be without practical support around you. And I really hope that you don't understand how impossible it can feel at times when parenting surfaces your own childhood trauma. It's a really tough job. Luckily, care experienced people are superheroes in both a figurative and a literal way. Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, these people all share my lineage. We shouldn't have to be superheroes, though. We shouldn't have to have superhero levels of resilience. We should get the help that we need. Care experienced people have greater rates of having their own children removed from them at an average cost of £1 million per child to the taxpayer. And I assume this is in no small way impacted by that lack of practical support that we receive. A great man, our very own Frank Dobson of Dunnington, once issued a challenge to councils. He said that you should ask yourselves, would this be good enough for your own children? So I ask you that today in a real way about me. Is the support that I've received in raising Oscar good enough? I don't think it is. But I bring with me today a way that you can provide practical support to care experienced people at almost 0 cost, and that is school allocations policies. I'll shortly be submitting my choices for schools for Oscar. My closest school to my house is 2 streets away. It's on a safe walking route. It's where many of our NCT friends are. Unfortunately, my catchment school is a mile away on a road that's often jammed with traffic, with terrible parking available. You can see the practicalities of attending the school that's really close to my house, where all of our friends are, to provide us with practical support, is a million miles different to attending a school that's a long way away, where we don't know anybody, with no support for unexpected events that life throws up. His closest school is actually right next to the secondary school that he will attend, which is something that my people long for, stability. But we're middle class, we'll manage, it'll be okay. It'll just be more difficult. I kind of think I've had enough difficulty in my life. So I'd urge the committee to explore the possibility of adding a priority to the school's allocation policy as priority 2 or 3 for the children of formerly looked after children. I'd like you to do what all good grandparents do, love their grandchildren. Love is a verb, it requires action. If this committee doesn't feel that it's able to love a child that it doesn't know, simply act like you love him. It's too late for Oscar. His allocation will happen shortly. The policy is already published and enacted. But it's not too late for my second child. I don't want to have to be a superhero for her. I just want to be her dad. and I'd like you to be her grandparent in a way that you haven't been for Oscar. When you consider your response to my request, please consider the challenge that Frank Dobson set. Would it be good enough for your own children? Because I am your child and I'm asking for your help.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Webb.
Chris, I just want to say thanks very much for coming along. We don't often get public speakers. We haven't traditionally had that many public speakers at Children's Scrutiny. I'm the exec member for Children and Young People, and I know when you got in touch with myself and you got in touch with Martin, we had a conversation about how best it would be for you to bring this to us. And I think that we sort of came to the decision that doing this publicly like this, where it would be recorded and put to the committee, is really, really important, because you are care experienced and because we are corporate parents. So I just want to sort of make that very clear and sort of say that thanks for coming along, and it is something that we want to look into. I cannot promise anything when it comes to school allocations, because it's a minefield, but it's certainly something that we will look at. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Councillor Webb, as well. Right, on to reports. Richard, welcome back. We've been here long enough to it's a return visit.
Chair. So what we've got here in front of you is your Q2 monitor. Picks up all of the areas under the responsibility of the Scrutiny Committee, which is all of the Children Education Directorate, plus a small element of the culture and communities services as well, as part of your scrutiny remit. As in previous monitors, you have an extract from the overall council report that went to the executive in November. The first part of the paper just sets out the overall council position, just as background information, and you'll see from that at the table on page 6, it overruns onto page 7, that the overall position, it has improved a little bit since Q1 for the council. I think it was about 11.4 million gross unmitigated overspend. That's now down to about 11.1, and then the mitigated position has improved by about £1 million. I think that was about a net to find of about 2 million at Q1. It's now down to about £1 million, according to that table. But clearly the focus for this committee is the information that starts from paragraph 18 on page 7. So that table there shows mainly the Children Education Directorate position, that table at paragraph 18. And I suppose the key thing for me, just in terms of summary, is to say that from Q1 on monitor 1, we had about a £4.6 million overspend projection, and that's come down to about 3.7 at Q2. And I think I tip members off at this committee, because we were preparing the Q2 as we came to the Q1 meeting, that was probably the direction of travel that we were at, particularly around the children education part of it, and particularly within children's safeguarding, where you'll see that's where the bulk of that change has come, in terms of the improvement from Q1 to Q2, and that's around the continuation of the work that's been done within that service, particularly around the reduction in the use of agency staff, and also in looking at more economical costs of placements, and reduction in more expensive out of city placements has driven that movement in that overspend. Clearly we're at Q2 now. We're preparing and working through the figures for Q3. I think there may well be some more improvement before the end of the year that we weren't confident enough to put in at Q2, but we're probably not going to see any more a significant improvement now before the end of the year. But I think it might get a little bit better before the end, I think, is my take on it. You've also got performance information for the service as well, and that's mainly set out in the annex, which has got the directorate scorecard. I don't have that's been prepared by Business Intelligence. There isn't anyone from Business Intelligence here at the meeting, but we hope we've got colleagues in the directorate as well, and they'll be able to pick up any questions on performance if you have any on that area as well. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Chair. just a couple of questions. One, just a sort of specific one, I suppose. Page 9, paragraph 24, talks about vacancies in the education psychologist service. And I just wanted to make sure whether they were vacancies that were being held open or whether that's just that there's a lag in recruitment.
Yeah, I can confirm that's just part of the recruitment process. So we've had a couple of maternity leave and some vacancies. People, it's an incredibly challenging environment nationally around education psychologists. We're seeing more education psychologists go off to the private sector, as well as other authorities that are able to offer different conditions. So it is something we're on top of and looking to make sure that we continue the recruitment of them. But it is a very difficult space.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, I mean, it's such a. I've got a separate question, but if you want to come in on that, if that's sorry.
Please, sorry, thank you, Chair. Because of, I'm just having a quick look at the wording again. Because of the shortage, the vacancies, has this impacted on the service? So is there like a backlog of cases that need to be addressed when the vacancies are filled?
It's certainly the timeliness of our education and healthcare plans is being impacted as it is nationally again. So it is concerning that when you haven't got a full team, particularly in somewhere like York that is already so small, you haven't got the economies of scale to be able to just soak that up. So in short, yes, it will have an impact on timeliness of education and healthcare plans. But we're continuing to make sure that we address that where we have a need for an education psychologist to have an input into an into an EHCP. There will be times where we may need to purchase that separately as an individual piece of work.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so my other question was sort of 2 or 3 things in this report, and it kind of relates to what we'll be going on to discuss a little bit further along as well, because it's just around some of the figures around care leavers and things. What I particularly wanted to pick up there was page 8, paragraph 20. Talks about, as previously reported, the number of children looked after in York has consistently been at a higher level than the budget was built to accommodate. And we've had it at a high level for at least the last 4 years, and we've had an overspend in this area for at least the last 4 years. And I'm just questioning whether or not we've actually appropriately allocated a budget, given that we've known for all of that time that we're going to have somewhere in the higher end of the 200s, when I think historically we've tended to have at the lower end of the 200s of care leavers. And it's certainly when I was on this committee 5 or 6 years ago, it was something that we used to talk about quite regularly, and it seems to still be the case that if we're not setting budgets at a level that's appropriate according to the demand and the level of service, aren't we just going to build in an overspend at every point? And so that paragraph or that line seems to me, well, it just jumped out at me as being strange.
I'll have a go and then you can have a go, Martin. Yes, I mean, I take your point, and I think you're right to say that if we've got 260, 256 end of September, and we've got a budget that's certainly designed to cover. I think the budget was originally designed or set at a number around about 200, and we did have a number of about 200 5, 6, 7 years ago. And what hasn't happened is that budget hasn't been increased as those numbers has been increased. In what has actually happened is that the directorate has been asked to try and keep and manage those numbers back down to the level that the budget is designed to support. Now that hasn't happened over the last 4 or 5 years. The number went up above where it is now. It is starting to come back down. And what you're highlighting is there needs to be a discussion around what is the most appropriate level at what we need to set the budget at. And I think that's what we're trying to do at the moment, I think, with colleagues in the service, is to try and understand what is the most appropriate level for the number of looked after children in York that we can then design that budget around. There has been growth put into the budget over the last few years, but that's generally been taken up by significant increases in costs and cost inflation within those areas. So I think, yeah, you're quite right to point that out.
Yeah, so it's absolutely right. I think as Richard has said, the budget's built for 200 children at a time where the cost of placements and particularly residential and foster care was significantly cheaper. We're in a market nationally that is regularly reported as being completely out of control, and that was identified in the National Care Review. So the challenges are significant. It's not just about the numbers, and actually, even if we were to set a budget now, it's such an unpredictable market. You can pay anything for a child from £17,000 for a placement up to £2.4 million for a placement. We're not paying that amount of money for any child, but there are some authorities that are having to do that. What I would say in terms of the original 200, around about 14 months ago, I think we were up to about 290. Today we're on 243, but 19 of those are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. 15 months ago, that would have been 6. So actually, in reality, we're down to around about 224 York children, and I think we'll probably continue to go in that positive direction, but not in the high numbers. And I think what we have done is significantly reprofile the budget on the basis that we've brought young people back from very expensive residential placements outside of the city. We had 18 for 14 months ago. I think we're now down to 10-ish. Yeah, about 10. And again, making sure that we relentlessly focus on doing the right thing for children. So we don't focus on the budget at all, to be really clear about making decisions for children. What we do is try to focus on doing the right thing, which is making sure that children are local, that they're with the family and their network wherever possible. We work relentlessly to keep children amongst their family network. And when they do need to come into care, that they go into the right placement, and that should be local. So a lot of work has been done. What I would say about the 19 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children is they are funded through the government, through the Home Office, although there is a cost to the local authority on top of what we get. But primarily, you do need to split those to look at the numbers, because we will see an increase as part of the National Transfer Scheme. So that we're heading towards our 0.01% of children who are unaccompanied asylum seekers, which is part of just the national agreement that is in place. That would see 34 young people being in the city who would be unaccompanied asylum seekers. But as I say, they are on the whole funded by the Home Office. So in short, we've got about 224, which is a phenomenal change, phenomenal different direction than where we were 14 and 15 months ago.
Okay, Councillor Knight, Councillor Waller, then Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. Was your Councillor Waller's follow-up question to this one?
All right.
Mine's a different question,
Right.
so it might make more sense to go to Councillor Waller.
It's really a follow-up in terms of it's been turning around the super tanker in terms of the approach that's been made, and obviously, like other authorities, our duty is not to provide profit for commercial outfits outside of the city, but actually to provide the best and most local solution for young children, young people to reach their full potential. So it's really understanding. Initially, the message was the numbers wouldn't come down very quickly, but that there would be work put in, and the investment that you've made in the culture change within the organisation to empower staff to, as you say, take those steps to keep children within the family. It's understanding what we will see coming down, because the expensive placements, there was a lot of work done very quickly on that, and that showed an effect in the spending. It's to understand what's happening next, and I think, Richard, if we could see those figures split out, because of the way that the funding from the Home Office comes for different cohort of young people, I think that would illustrate the work that's been done to have a figure which is more in line with where the city would normally be. And that I think would be a help to us to understand from a scrutiny perspective where we would focus some of the attention on seeing where the policies are providing the outcomes that we would like to see and the benefit to young people.
Yeah, I think some of that, to be clear, is about some of that culture change is about making sure that you've got consistency of practice across your social work service. So again, 15 months ago, and this is part of the budget reduction as well, there was around about 8, I'll say around about, it's a very definite figure, there was 8 senior managers who were agency staff, and 26 social workers who were agency staff. So a lot of inconsistency of people coming through the system. Sometimes agency staff stay from a number of days or weeks or months, but are perhaps a little bit arguably less invested in the very long-term future. So we have managed to reduce the senior managers down to 0, and the social workers are down from 26 to 2. And as of January, we shouldn't hopefully have any need for agency social workers, which is very much against the trend nationally. You know, if you look around us, there are some agents, some local authorities around us that have up to 200 agency social workers, but it just presents an inconsistency in decision making. What's really important in a childcare system is that you've got people who understand the practice model that are invested in that approach, and that are invested in keeping children safe in a particular way. So that's some of the changes that have been made around the culture and the practice to ensure the right decisions are made. And some of that will actually, you know, isn't just about changing what we've got, it's about making sure that children that may come in the future, that we're doing the right things for those children. And that primarily is to try and keep them amongst their family and network where possible, because we know that long-term outcomes for children who come into care are generally not quite as good as those that will stay at home and amongst their network.
Sorry, Chair, may I just...
Can I?
Clarity.
Sorry. So I think that
Councillor Webb, I think what's that?
we might both be on the same point here, but I just want to talk about unaccompanied asylum seeker children and the idea of separating them out in the papers in some ways. So it's very clear that that's what we're spending on. I think someone said it's sort of York children, and that's what we're spending on other children. I think there's a real danger around that. They're in York. They are our young people that it's the right thing to do to care for them. We are a city of sanctuary. And so I just think there's just a bit of nuance around that rather than separating that out. And I just sort of think that that's an important point to make, because it's a difficult situation regardless, but I think it's something just to be clear that I think there's maybe a little bit more nuance than just having a separate table for young people who've come to us from elsewhere. I'm not sure what that looks like right now, but I just wanted to make that point here.
Just follow up. Yeah, it's a fresh question. I was going to say this is part of.
Yeah, it was just a point of clarity, just on a couple of things that were said, and I absolutely echo Councillor Webb's point, but it wasn't what I was wanting to just be clear on, because I don't disagree with everything that's been said about the need to try to make sure that we're accommodating young people as close to home as possible, and changing the culture and service and all of those sort of things. But the kind of initial point I was trying to get at with my question is, if we know that the level of need is at a higher level and has just been at a higher level for a number of years, why are we setting a budget at a level that is not sufficient to meet that need? And I was really pleased to hear you say, Martin, that you don't look at the budget when you're thinking about the support that's needed, and that I think everybody around the table, I'm sure, would agree with that in this particular area. But at the same time, if we're thinking globally or council-wide about where we use our resources, we do need to make sure that we've got the appropriate resources in the areas. And so it just worries me that we're setting, or have at least been setting, budget to meet a need that is sufficiently or significantly below what the actual need is.
I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Crawshaw. I think it is important to understand where the budget should be set so broadly that when you start in the year, you can work with you know, you should have. I think what we wanted to do is make sure that we understood having the right practice model in place, getting the right staffing in place, having consistency of practice within the city would help us start to understand what that number would look like. So it was, you know, we thought it was 200. There's some very, very sophisticated work that's been done in the past to recognise that it was 200. We need to understand what it would be today, and we can take the national figure of the number of young people in care. We can take the local, regional figure, which are very different, or we can take the York figure, which would again be equally different. So I think what we've been looking for is a bit more of a settled system. I think we're pretty much there. So by the time we go into the next financial year, we've talked. Myself and Richard have talked certainly about then looking ahead for the next 3 years, and actually what should we be doing in terms of making sure that we have a level of consistency around understanding what the budget should look like and setting it where it needs to be. That doesn't mean that it's for children's services to come through a massive ask to the council to say, you know, we need to invest millions. I think we just need to make sure that we get it settled, but it's in a really unsettled market nationally. You know, as I said, you know, tomorrow I might get a young person that could cost me £1 million. It might not happen. If we get a young person that is remanded to youth custody, that costs something like £576 per night. If they're in a custodial setting, if they're in a secure children's home, it's a completely different rate. So it's a really difficult way of trying to find what a budget should look like. But I think we're going to get there probably towards the sort of next, not the next budget round, but the one after that, to making sure what it looks like.
Thank you for indulging me.
Any more questions on the budgetary type thing before I move on to Councillor Knight and Councillor Cuthbertson?
Thank you. I've just got a question with the Disabled Children's Services provision at paragraph 22. Just can you explain exactly how the direct payments work? If that can be completed in a short sentence or two. And also my question is, there's a reference to a review of historic direct payments. How's that going? What's the state of play so far, please?
So the first part in terms of direct payments is predominantly something that's used within disabled children's services. It can be used in other parts of council resources, but it's where a parent will want to commission their own services to provide. So if to give you an example, if a parent has a regular childminder that may be the best person to provide them support for their child and the additionality that they need for the disability, then effectively we will provide them a direct payment to provide that support rather than us commission the service or provide the service. And what was the second part of the question, very quickly, or did I?
Understanding how the review is going.
The review of direct payments is underway. So there's a cohort of families who do receive a direct payment, and that is about us reviewing those, assessing need, and looking at where that's at. So that is underway.
Just asking. Sorry, just asking, do you have a time scale in place? Do you have an expectation of when that might be completed?
Certainly by the end of this year.
The end of this year, brilliant, thank you.
Right, it goes Cuthbertson, Runciman, and Wells.
We're not having permission yet, Chair. My question is about paragraphs 19 and 21 on the particular mention of agency staff. I know that members around the table are aware of my interest, which has already been declared on my register of interest. And it's not a question of, I don't have my sales hat on this evening. What I'm concerned about is when we reduce agency staff to a certain level, or maybe below a certain level, are we replacing them with permanent staff? Are we doing without? Have we altered the profile of our spend so that we don't need them? And if we have altered the profile of our spend, what are the consequences?
Okay, so no, we're not going without. So within social work practice, we would be expecting to see a particular number of cases per social worker. So if we go above that number, then we would be concerned, both for practice, but also for any inspection that would come along and find that that wouldn't be particularly good practice. So no, it's something that we focus on all the time. I think some of it is about with changing our practice. So if one person leaves, rather than just going to an automatic approach of we need to replace them, looking at how that can be contained within the wider team, as well as the majority of we've managed to recruit far better than has been the situation in the past. So we've had a relentless focus on recruitment, use much more of social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever we can to make sure that we get people through the door, but also just having a practice model, something that people can invest in. And what we have done is invest very heavily in training, so that we've got something different to offer than perhaps some of those around us.
I just follow that up point. I welcome the training that we give in this authority, having taken part in the first social work academy that was run about 4 years ago. But it's the comment in 21, for instance, there is a predicted overspending corporate parenting staffing teams of 131k as the staffing budgets make no provision for the extra costs of agency staff. Nearly all the agency staff have now left. And that was what gave rise to my particular question. Have we replaced the ones who aren't there? Have we got new permanent staff, or have we altered the profile of our delivery?
No, we've got new permanent staff. In fact, actually, we've increased the number of social workers that we've got overall from where we were 15 months ago. So what we are being is more successful at getting people through the door. And some of that is about new social workers that are coming into the system. So young people. Social workers that are newly trained, but also we've managed to recruit some very well trained, well qualified staff along the way as well. So no, we've absolutely got, I would say, probably lower caseloads now than we've had for a very long time.
Good to hear that. Thank you.
Just a reminder, talk straight to the microphone for me, will you? And talk like Bob Webb does, because he's got a nice teacher's voice.
Everybody's having a go at the volume of my voice. That's all I get all day.
It's just our teachers, and that's just the way it is.
Thank you, Councillor.
I want to ask about paragraph 23 on page 8, the homeschool transport. And there's two parts to this question. First of all, is there enough provision for the children, the young people, these are, that need to go to the places as mentioned on the top of page 9? And secondly, I want to know, are we still using YILT, so you are accompanied on a bus, or you get a bus pass if you're old enough and capable enough to do so, because we had a big push of that some years ago, and we were surprised at the number of young people who were capable of managing, sometimes with some help. I wonder if you could just update me on that, please.
So the first bit was around the level of provision. So I think the answer to that is we know the reason for the forecast overspend is because of the increase in numbers, and then we are providing a service to that increased numbers, and that's what's driving the overspend. So that answers that part of the question, and that's coming over the last few years. The second part was, I've forgotten it already. YILTS, yeah. My understanding is the YILT service is still in existence and still operating.
It's not.
It is still, yes, yeah.
Who's operating it, Richard?
We've still got a budget for it, so I'm
I'll
looking
come back
at
to you, Brad, on that and send you an email.
Yeah,
I'll come back to you and send you an email. It's not something I can answer right now.
yeah.
Okay. It's just that anything that helps young people to be independent, in my book, is a very good thing. So they don't get a whole lot of support. Then when they stop getting that support, they fall off a cliff edge.
It was supplementary offer. Go on, then we'll come to Wellman. No, carry on. We'll come to Council.
This is actually following on from the homeschool transport issue. The change in legislation to allow EHCPs running up to age 25. how long's that been in existence? What's the effect and what's the predicted effect over the next, say, 5 years? Top of page 9, paragraph 23.
The number of EHCPs for up to 25 is actually going down, which is where we want it to be, because actually, as Councillor Runciman said, it, you know, I think it's what's really important is that we ensure that young people become more independent. Having an EHCP up to the age of 25 shows a dependency, and what happens at 25 is, you know, there's a big shock to the system. So increasingly, what we're doing is reviewing education healthcare plans more effectively, and finding better ways for young people to become independent, including finding them ways to get into work that becomes more where they're able to you know, function as all of us do within society.
So what you're really telling that this committee is actually that the significantly increased spend on EHCP students up to the age of 25 is now decreasing and won't continue at its previous higher level.
The number of EHCPs is reducing. What I can't do is predict spend based on the fact that there's so many different potential risks in terms of, you know, what we have seen is over the last couple of years, as we've all seen, the cost of everything has increased significantly, particularly things like transport. You know, anybody that puts petrol in the car or diesel will know that those things have gone up significantly. So I'm not going to predict the future, but what I can predict is that more young people will be coming off education and healthcare plans before they get to 25, because they shouldn't just be waiting until they get there.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Just following on from Councillor Cuthbertson's point, I think, just to make members aware, we've just set up a SEND employment partnership, where there was a SEND employment conference that took place probably a couple of months ago now, specifically around connecting people with SEND needs to employers and looking at basically jobs. Can't remember the term now, but employment opportunities for young people, basically. And that is going back to what Councillor Runciman was saying about increasing independence could be really huge. So it's a really positive step. And I think that officers, it's the beginning of that process, but I think officers are doing a good job on that. And it's something we just need to keep an eye on, because hopefully that can support young people into independence in a further way. But yeah, again, the HCP costs can vary wildly, as we all know.
Is it to follow up on this? Is it a fresh question?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, hello, thank you.
Is it a follow-up?
I think this is actually a question for Richard.
No,
Sorry?
is it a follow-up on this? Because Councillor Wells been waiting a while. Is it a fresh question or a follow-up?
All right.
I'm wanting to understand a bit more about the families and children in temporary accommodation and the support that we give them. On a personal note, I can't think of anything worse than a child being put into temporary accommodation and losing the connection with their surroundings. But then if they're offered accommodation, that presumably in temporary accommodation, they'll be going to a school near that. And then if they're offered another accommodation elsewhere, they'll have to then rebuild relationships in another school. Or do we allow them to continue at a school? And is there transport and everything?
So could I just clarify, are you asking where children move from their family to a foster placement, or are you thinking about children that exist within their family where their family are moving into temporary housing?
I was thinking of both, because I was thinking, first of all, it says that the number of families are increasing, the number of, and it's now at pre-pandemic levels. I'm presuming that during the pandemic, people weren't been made homeless because of the government rules. But now that they are, we're presumably housing them in temporary accommodation, and then we'll be looking to house them in a more permanent place. And so that's like 2 moves that they've had. And I'm just thinking of the nerves, their mental health, and also losing all the friends and their support circle as well.
I think that's probably a question for a future scrutiny, if I'm completely honest, because I think what you're asking is a question that really requires housing to be here, housing colleagues to be here. If there's a need for social care or early help involvement where there's a family that are moving into temporary accommodation, then obviously we will provide that support from a children's services perspective. Many families won't need that support. They will continue to be perfectly able to look after their children, even though they're moving from one place to another. The bit that I can answer is where children are moving from a family into a foster placement or temporary placement. What we are trying to do is increase the number of children that stay in the city so that they've got an identity and they're close to the family. And we continue to build those family networks and relationships. But I think your question is probably a bit more of a housing question.
It sort of is, and I agree with you there, but we're still looking after those children. We still have a responsibility to them, and we will have to find a school for them. And they could be moving to the other side of York, in which case they either change schools or they need support in getting to their other school. And it was that sort of thing. And I agree, it does cover housing. It also covers their health issues as well. And so it was what interaction do we have between the different departments?
So we do have all departments work closely together. I would say, having come from a different authority into an authority that works very well together, because housing is in the same local authority. When you come from a place, a non-unitary authority, obviously housing exists in district councils. So I think we have a good relationship. We work together. For example, if a child is on a child protection plan and the family become homeless, then we will work very closely with housing to make sure that the impact on that child is limited as much as it possibly can be. People become homeless for all sorts of reasons, including tenants of pubs, for example, the tenancy finishes. So not all families look the same. I think what we can do, if this committee feels as though it's an important piece of work, is to look at that group of families and children. Quite specifically, it's something that I wouldn't have the information available to hand. I could certainly go and get it from colleagues, and I think we could have a bit of a deeper look. But that, I think, that's for those families that are moving through housing issues within York, which is a challenge for any local authority. There are generally 3,000 or 4,000 people waiting for housing at any one time, and therefore finding housing that's suitable in the area that the child comes from or the area that the family come from can be significantly challenging. But we work together on individual cases where it becomes a very, very important issue for that child to remain in their school, for example. We'll do a lot across the city to make sure that children remain close to what's important for their identity, and school is often that thing that is an anchor for children. It keeps them safe. So we will work as 2 departments very closely to make sure that those issues are minimised.
There's a follow-up.
Yeah, it was just a follow-up, and hopefully you'll be able to give us it's a straightforward question, straightforward answer. Page 21, which just talks, it has the numbers of children in temporary accommodation, and the figure for 2020-21, I presume, is a suppressed figure because of COVID, and so that leap from 15 to 51 between 2020-21 and 21-22, I'm assuming is a hangover from the COVID figures. But then there does still seem to have been a pretty much 20% rise between this year and last year. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts as to, what's behind that, and whether or not we might anticipate a continuing rise in that figure, or is that a sort of figure that historically has been around about that figure in York? It doesn't obviously go back further than 2021, so it's difficult to see where it's come from.
it's more difficult because I'm trying to find it, but just tell me where
So
about.
it's page 21.
Yeah.
Just at the top of the page, it's about the the fifth row down. It's the number of children in temporary accommodation snapshot. And it goes 15 in 2020-21, 51 in 21-22, and then 63 in 22-23. So I'm assuming that 15 figure is a artificially low figure. And we haven't had just a huge leap year on year, but we've still had a fairly big leap.
I would also assume, given the fact that the government were very clear that people were not to move accommodation during the middle of COVID, during the middle of the pandemic, that number was superficially kept low.
Yeah.
So I think we would need to look at probably a several year position. But as I answered earlier on, you know, the children that are with their families, and families will at times move around from one place to another. That's not to suggest that it's perfectly okay. But from a children's services perspective, what's really important for me as the director of children's services is that those children are safe, and that if they don't meet a threshold for a social service intervention, you know, help intervention, they're perfectly okay with their families can cope and manage that situation. And then that's not something that I'd be paying a great deal of attention to as an individual director. As I say, I think we'd need to get colleagues from housing that would work alongside me to look at that particular issue if we felt that we wanted to look at it.
Councillor Webb, then answer, then Waller, and then Knight, please. Councillors Webb.
Yeah, I think that it's worth just saying to members that, you know, these figures, when I first saw them, that they were concerning to me as well, really. I think we can't get away from the fact that in York we have a housing crisis, and this doesn't, you know, our young people are not immune from that, and their families are not immune from that. But in terms of what Martin's sort of saying around about working with housing colleagues, that's something that the executive cross-portfolio have been looking at, how we can build in a sort of a broader homelessness strategy that sort of starts from you know, childhood through to adulthood, really, because it's clear that there is an issue in this city, and that's why, you know, housing is something that we have been focusing on. But I do think that longer term, as we start to develop that model, it might be something that this committee wants to sort of look at, or it could be the housing committee, or whichever, really. But I think it's something that does need to be looked at over time, and I think it would make a nice piece of scrutiny, really, sort of maybe pre-decision sort of thing, just to sort of think about how it would work and how we could build it in properly. But it's not something we're not thinking about, because it is a concern.
Councillor Waller, then Councillor Knight, please.
It's a new question.
Oh, is yours a new question, Councillor Knight?
No, it's just a quick follow-up.
Right.
It's just, you may not have the figure to hand, but it would be good to understand how long generally families with dependent children find themselves in temporary accommodation, because that can have a huge impact. You know, if it's short bursts, that has a negative impact. They settle somewhere and then they're moved again, that can have an impact. So it's just understanding what sort of timescales we're looking at on average.
Yep, as I say, if you want to take a dive into it, more than happy for that to come back here. What I would say is I think we're straying into the scrutiny for housing, of which I attended to the last one, and some of these issues were raised and discussed. So I think we're probably straying into an area that probably isn't for the scrutiny committee.
Councillor Waller, then. Fresh question, Councillor Waller.
The question is in relation to the safety valve, and really understanding that the work that's been done to ensure that we get the maximum support from government, accepting that it would be better central government were properly funding the service to start with, but this is really the only game in town to address that. So it's just understanding that we are reaching the full potential on getting that money in, has been the case previously.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, we are. We're hitting we've hit all of the targets that DfE have set for us over the last 2.5 years, and secured all of the funding that was in the original plan to date. And we are projecting that we will continue to hit those targets until the end of this financial year. There are some more challenging targets in the following two financial years that, you know, we might want to talk about in the future, but at the moment we are hitting all of those targets and we've secured all that funding.
I think it'd be helpful to understand that challenge before it hits us.
You're gonna have to speak to the mic. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. I think we need to know the details of that challenge so that we can appreciate that the changes of policy that might need to be included so that that funding's delivered.
Yeah, I think, but fairly simply, I think the challenge for Safety Valve is it requires us to make sure as a system that more children that have complex needs remain in mainstream settings, that fewer children have an education healthcare plan, which is increasing nationally. So there are some challenges, and I think those that have been in safety, those other authorities that have been in Safety Valve haven't been as successful as York and have had to renegotiate their position, or try to renegotiate their position with the Department for Education to continue to get their funding. At the moment, I think, as Richard has said, we're confident that we'll continue to draw down the funding on the basis of meeting the requirements. But the challenge is that the complexity of the system, the complexity post-COVID, which has almost supercharged the society's complexity, whether it's mental health, whether it's speech and language, and other issues, that neurodiversity, schools are finding more challenging to look after children in the classroom. So as a system, we need to make sure that we continue to try and ensure that young people are supported at the very earliest opportunity with the least intervention, which is important for children, because actually children don't want to be sat in a classroom with 2 or 3 or 4 adults around them, feeling that they need to be supported on a very individual basis. But those are some of the difficulties that we have as a system.
Thank you, Chair. This sort of beginnings of a discussion reminds me of a conversation that I had with Tony McCardle just nearly 2 years ago, when it was made very clear to me that the amount that they were budgeting to support the authority by, if they were to accept our request at that time, they did, fortunately, but it was made very clear that that would be it, and we would be in real trouble if we had to renegotiate it. So my question is about the wording of paragraph 29, where we say on the second line, following the first payment of additional funding under the Safety Valve agreement. That additional funding is what was due under the Safety Valve, isn't it? It's not additional.
It is, yeah. It's additional to the normal annual grant that we would receive. It's part of,
a slight sort of ambivalence there. And then the question of the further 4.5 million of additional DSG paid during the year. I suppose my question is, how does that affect anything that's due under the DSG, under the Safety Valve? Was that what was planned? I can't remember the exact amount.
yeah, the 4.5 million that's referred to in the middle of paragraph 29 is part of the 17 million pound Safety Valve agreement. I think, recall correctly, we were scheduled to receive 2.5 million of it during 22-23, and the DFE advanced another 2 million to us towards the end of the year, but I think that was just for their accounting reasons rather than anything else. So they gave us an advance in our 23-24 allocation. So we should have got 2.5. We got 4.5, but then we've got 2 million less in this year, if that makes sense. And that's all out of the 17 million total allocation over 5 years.
And as I remember it, the targets to be met in the later years were the more difficult ones. To what extent do we anticipate problems happening with those? I mean, is it a minefield, or have we got a good chance of meeting those targets? It'll be somebody else who accounts to Tony McCardle. That's not my problem, but
again, I think it's incredibly difficult to predict. I think at the moment we're confident that we'll continue as we are. I think we'll need to sit and review it in the middle of next year to understand whether that becomes a significant pressure that we need to be worried about. What I would say is, and I'll try and remain non-political completely, is that you know, what the government have put in place to address this is a sticky plaster. You know, whilst we reset the £17 million, that does not address the funding that needs to be in place for the future if we continue under the current legislation that was introduced in 2014. So there either needs to be a significant change in legislation, or there will need to be continued funding that will need to come from any successive governments in the future to make sure that we don't go back into a significant debt.
I think my one response to that comment is you may be very right, but the promise that was made was anticipating that we would be able to stay within central budget allocation following 25-26.
And we will. So that's my prediction, is at the moment we will. There's nothing to say that we won't, but we just need to keep it under review.
Thank you.
New question, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, and you'll be relieved to know it's my last question of this.
It's the last question of this section.
It's the last one that I had. It was just really, again, it's a bit of a direction of travel type question, and whether or not the figures should be something to be concerned about or not. Page 11, the top of that page is a table, and it's number of children that are subject to a child protection plan. And the Q1 to Q2 has seen nearly a 30% increase. Now, I accept that the figures, you know, it's 97 up to 126. And I assume that, you know, two or three large families with all the children being subject to a protection plan could skew those figures. And the direction of travel indicator on this data that we've got is that actually that's a neutral. We shouldn't be worrying too much about it, but it did seem to be quite a big jump. I wasn't sure whether it was a time of year thing, whether it's just, this is just how the figures do vary. And I presume the number can go up as well as going down, sort of thing.
So I think it's neutral because we're not concerned about it. The child protection numbers, again, 14 and 15 months ago with 197. So they went down significantly. And I think what we're finding is that the system is rebalancing itself, if you like. And I think we're within we are within our expected range. The 97 just brought us just slightly down below our expected range, but the current figures is where we'd expect to be somewhere about, but it can change. And as you say, any large numbers, any family with large numbers of children can significantly skew the numbers.
Yeah. Councillor Wells.
This is really only a quick one, I promise. On page 22, it says that the hospital admissions for asthma in children have risen quite a lot. But I'm presuming that the first year that we've got figures for was during COVID. And so do we have figures before that to compare this with? Because it's very difficult to say, well, the figures have gone up if we're looking at traffic as a cause, or if we're looking for a cause for it. I just wondered if we'd got something previous to that.
I can take that back to business intelligence and ask them if that data is available, and we can distribute that if that's acceptable.
Cool. Thank you. Just a couple of things. Whether we want to make a decision now or add them on at the end for our work plan, but obviously it was mentioned about the movement and the housing and whether we're crossing somewhere we shouldn't, or we have a joint one or something. But again, I don't want to add to our workload till the end to see what the rest of the reports bring in. And the other thing was about the budget as well. I think I picked it as well. We predicted overspend, continuing overspend, and not understanding how the budgeting works. I don't know if Councillor Well will be bidding for lots of money from his colleague to stop the predicted overspending. But whether or not we want to look at that as being, I think the point Councillor Crawshaw made was a good one. And I think quite a few picked up on it, was that to have predicted and continuing is a concern. So Councillor Webb's now going to correct.
Yeah, I think there's, in terms of the budgeting process, there's sort of two ways of looking at it really. One is you basically say, start from scratch and go, all right, how much would everybody be allocated? And that's not something that we're looking at currently. And one is obviously sort of the traditional way of looking at what we are currently offering and how we negotiate that across departments. But in terms of funding, I think it's really important to say that, you know, we must say this every opportunity we get. Over the next 4 years, we have to make £10 million worth of savings every year for the next 4 years, unless something fundamental changes with the way that local authorities are funded. So, yes, we have to budget accordingly. And yes, believe me, I argue tooth and nail to make sure everything comes to children and young people. And on the whole, I do pretty well out of that, and children do pretty well out of that, because quite frankly, it's often statutory services, whereas other areas of the council, that's not necessarily the case. But the fundamental problem is there is not enough money coming into York, whether that's in education, health, the local authority, the fire brigade, whatever it is, we are underfunded. And until that gets dealt with, we are going to keep having this argument for not enough money. But yes, believe me, I do fight for the young people and the budgets that's under my control. Thank you.
Right, we'll come back to this at the end. We just want to talk about the housing thing. Thank you. See you next quarter. Sorry, Councillor Merrick.
Just one thing before you disappear, Richard.
Oh, you nearly got out.
On page 12, the figures on the percentage of working age population qualified to at least level 4 and above show a massive increase between 2021 and 2021-22. And although it says the 2022-3 data's. Sorry. Right, yeah. There's a massive increase between the 2021 figures and the 21-22 figures in the percentage of working age population qualified to at least L4 and above. And I just wondered whether, when you're speaking to the business intelligence unit, you could ask if they could give us some explanation on that. And hopefully they might also have the next year's figures by then.
I can certainly do that, but obviously don't have the answer myself, but I can see if we can get an answer back on that one.
Thank you.
Now you can go. Wait, Rob. Before we go on to the next bit, I'm sure we all spotted that we got an award, York City Council, for our early talk for York children's speech and language, which my understanding is Councillor Cuthbertson and Waller were heavily involved in the previous existence. So congratulations. So whatever you did for that, it's well deserved, and well done to the council for getting such an award.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be appropriate to compliment the officer team, particularly Rob, who masterminded the project and managed it from its early days and was instrumental in gaining support from outside.
Second that.
Yeah, I think let's formally record thanks or whatever we need to do and speak to Rob Newton. I think it's great work that they've been doing, and yeah, it's something that we've all supported around this table, really. So in different ways, but thank you very much for everyone who's been involved.
Before we do, I did bring sweets because it's Christmas. And it says on the side, share good times. And since we've just had a good time, share it. So even Reese, you can have some. Don't worry, they'll come back there. Better eat them, because otherwise I've got to take them out and I just get fatter. Right, what are we up to next then? We looked after Martin and Danielle. I bet Danielle's going to say more now, didn't she, than Martin?
Thank you. Danielle Johnson, Director of Safeguarding. The report at page 25 provides an overview on the new corporate parenting strategy, key information in relation to children and young people in care, key messages from young people and how they've influenced service developments and development of our fostering and residential provision. As we've heard this evening, when children come into our care, the tasks of their parents, we become responsible for that. This is known as corporate parenting. The question we need to ask ourselves is if this was my child, would it be good enough? Our corporate parenting strategy is currently in draft. That's due at the executive in February, and that really outlines our ambitions for children and young people who are looked after by us as their corporate parents. It sets out our long-term aspirations for care experienced young people as they become adults. We have a number of strategic priorities, very much around where young people live, that we do our very best to find them carers who will get to know them, who they can feel safe and comfortable with, recognising how important family and friends are in supporting young people to thrive, and keeping in touch with families and friends where that's possible. Education, how we engage young people in education and to reach their full potential. And we have that real sense of belonging within schools. Health, working in partnership with health to ensure the health needs of children and young people are in care and met, and that they're prioritised, and supporting young people into adulthood and independence, and that everybody's playing their part in becoming a corporate parent. Our children and young people have a voice in the way we deliver our services, and we need to act upon what they tell us. There's already been conversation this evening around how a number of children and young people in care. Back at the point in Q2, we had 254 children. You'll see the graph on page 27 that sees the number of children in care over time. We've been above our expected range. That's also been raised this evening, above for several years. We're now at a stage where we're better than our regional and national figures per 10k population, but we are still slightly higher than our stat neighbours. Again, there's been a discussion about unaccompanied young people that we've welcomed and supported within York. We currently have 19, and we expect that to increase further. We are funded by the Home Office for the care of unaccompanied young people, but that funding often doesn't cover that cost of provision. We've made a real commitment in York to involve our children and young people in the development of services. That's happened in a number of different ways. We've developed a model for corporate parenting advisors who've been involved and had that direct influence and attendance at corporate parenting board. We've got our children in care council, Show Me That I Matter, and our care leavers forum, I Still Matter. Our young people have had direct involvement and delivery of training, involvement in interview panels, and a really key influence around appointment in senior positions. We've had our You Matter survey where we're working together the views of young people. In October 23, Show Me That I Matter and I Still Matter were shortlisted at the National Participation Award by Quorum Voice, and we should really celebrate that. In November, the involvement of young people in the development of Wenlock was a finalist at the Care Leavers Celebration event run by the National Care Leaving Benchmarking Forum, which is really, really positive, and again, we should celebrate. Young people have supported the development of the model of Wenlock through that recruitment of staff, branding of the development, and also inputting into the design and decoration of the home itself. Young people have joined forces with the fostering service. They're involved in the Snooks Trail, which is coming to York in late February to April and organised by Make It York. I've mentioned the You Matter survey where young people have had the say about their care experience, and then it's for us to act on that. The Show Me That I Matter and I Still Matter annual report is attached for your information. In August 23, we had a focus visit by Ofsted, and that focus visit was around our arrangements for care leavers. Overall, that was a positive visit. Inspectors found that care leavers are well supported by staff with whom they have stable and trusted relationships. They're supported effectively into adulthood by workers who are emotionally invested in them. Senior leaders have created a culture across the council in which care leavers are valued and given a high priority status. And senior leaders and members are strong and active corporate parents who are committed to improving the lives young people. We had 2 areas for improvement around supervision and our updated of pathway plans, which we have plans in place. And again, there's a link in there in terms of the full report from the focus visit. We are developing our sufficiency strategy. There's been lots of conversations, I think, this evening around sufficiency, which really sets out our resources and how we cater for the diverse needs for our children in care. In 22, we set up our Make York Home panel to really look at children and young people's placements. That was to think about our young people who were cared for externally, where we pay for external provision. And the focus was about ensuring that those placements are the right ones, that we're only using external provision when we absolutely need to. And to reduce where we can those expensive out of area placements. In April 23, we had 35 foster placements, which were through independent fostering agency. In November, that's reduced to 27. In April, we had 14 children in external residential provision. In November, that's reduced to 10. We are committed to prioritising the needs of our children and planning for the future. Really focusing on enabling that early intervention and family support, encouraging collaboration amongst all of our stakeholders and empowering children and their family. We face the same challenges. Again, that discussion has happened this evening as many local authorities in sufficient placement provision to meet the needs of children and young people. We have had real developments, particularly over the last 6 to 12 months around developing our residential offer of Wenlock Terrace, which is a 6-bed children's home. And that really will provide the much needed placements for children and young people. Young people, as I've mentioned, have been heavily involved in that. And our provision, which is a multi-agency provision, will be called Together We Can. It really is about supporting children and young people at the right time. Residential care service often work with our most complex young people. And I think it's important to say that what we can see is that external provision can often give up very, very, very easily. We believe through Together We Can that if we stick with young people, develop those trusting relationships, we can really make a difference for long-term outcomes. It will support us, absolutely support us internally around placement pressures, but we will continue to work with families for children to remain at home wherever they can. Now, fostering service, we've recruited an experienced registered manager together with a head of resources, their permanent positions, and we're really doing a review of that service at the present time, looking at our work streams, efficiency, and how we increase the number of in-house foster carers. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillors.
Thank you, Danielle. It was an interesting report. I want to ask about the health issues. Are we finding health is cooperating well? And the next one is, what about dental checks? And the next one is, what about eye checks? Can you just tell me how that link with health is going?
I think that overall we have a good relationship with health. We work closely with them as part of the corporate parenting board and have that challenge. We've certainly had that challenge around health assessments, particularly initial health assessments, and you'll see that in the corporate parenting annual report. We are seeing increasing number of children being able to access dentists. We monitor and track the performance around that. And every service does have pressures, but you know that's what the corporate parenting board is about. It's about coming together and really offering one another that challenge so that we can get the very best that we can for our children and young people.
Just very quickly to add to that, I think Danielle talked about the children's home that we're opening, and we've managed to secure from the ICB a commitment of £100,000, which is ongoing, and that will pay for a clinical psychologist and speech and language therapist to work alongside the children that are the most complex to look after. They'll also work across other parts of the system. So, for example, young people that are moving on and transitioning from residential care into supported accommodation. So there'll be a softening of young people moving into to being independent. And that clinical psychologist will help in terms of formulation and support the staff who are working with children. They won't be working in a back office. They won't be working on an appointment basis. They will work alongside young people in the home full time, permanently, and that's a really secure investment from health. Equally, I'd like to, whilst I'm mentioning health, the police have also put in a full-time police officer into that arrangement, and a commitment around a police analyst that works in the background that helps us ensure that we can manage the complexity around things like exploitation, which often young people who've been through many placements have got a range of complexities that needs all agencies to work together in a really effective and aligned way.
One quick follow-up, if I may, about health records and health passports. I knew somebody who was actually adopted rather than fostered, went for a job as an adult and was asked what vaccinations he had no idea what vaccinations he had. And hopefully, if the health passports or the health records are as they should be, that sort of problem will be overcome. Could you just comment on that?
It has been highlighted in the New Matter survey around health passports. So that work is being undertaken to ensure that young people do have full access to their health history. They are in place. I think we need to do more around that. For a young person who is adopted, that's a little bit different, but it is about ensuring that full information is available and that they are able to access that.
Thank you.
Councillor Merritt.
I note in the annual report the issue that young people are having around housing and the protocol that you produced in response. Can I understand, first of all, what those housing issues were, the type and range of issues, and how the protocol's addressing them?
I think that there was a number of issues, as there is across the city around housing. Young people rightly challenged in terms of the housing, particularly about their rights as care experienced young people. I think that housing have come to the table on that. There is potentially more and always more that we can do around providing housing. I think young people challenged rightly so within the board. That was accepted around housing, around issues such as repairs, that young people should not be made, if they're care experienced, intentionally homeless, and housing have been on that journey with us.
How many of the young people are able to get accommodated in York, or are we finding that when they go into the housing market, they're not able to get accommodation here and are being forced out of the city? Was that not an issue?
No, we're not seeing young people being forced out, certainly being forced out of the city because there isn't accommodation as they're reaching adulthood or independence. We would be prioritising young people and supporting them to remain within the city. And we're certainly supporting young people who are in care where they want to where they are outside the city and they want to be here, and that they're able to come back safely either to their family or networks or with provision here.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for the report. Loads of really good stuff in there. I just want to take us right back to the start of the report, really, page 26, paragraph 5, which sets out the priorities for the corporate parenting strategy overall. And number 5, and I think this is covered within what you've said anyway, but it's just really for reassurance, and I guess for us all to be thoughtful of. I'm always a bit nervous when we talk about trying to support young people and care leavers to be independent, because I think if you're somebody who perhaps has struggled with attachment, has had periods of feeling isolated or alone and unwanted and all of those negative things, to then be told that life is about being independent is maybe not a message that's particularly appealing. And, you know, we're not independent as human beings. We tend to build networks that are codependent. And actually the public speaker at the start of this session, I think, illustrated a really good example there where, you know, actually the need for some level of dependence and being able to depend on people for support is, you know, really helpful. So I guess wanted some assurance that the use of the word independence is perhaps a shorthand maybe for resilience and confidence and you know, the sort of social skills and all of those sort of things, and that we're not giving people a message that actually you get to the age of 25 and that's it, you're on your own out in that big scary world and on you go sort of thing.
Absolutely. In terms of independence, I think we recognise for all children and young people, whether they're care experienced or not, they're independent at different stages. We are seeing that later and later. I think as we all know, it is down to individual needs. We are talking very much around our local offer, how we support our care experienced young people and how we support them beyond 25. There's work that we're also doing earlier on within the service, so we should never really get to that point, because we should be building networks and communities that support our young people so that they're already there. We shouldn't be needing to go out later on in young people's lives in their journey to try and find them. We should be doing that much earlier so that they're growing with that. They're having established lifelong relationships that they're able to rely on, and they're able to take independence at their own pace. So for some young people who turn 18, they may stay, for example, with their foster carers as staying put arrangements. We do have a high number of children, young people who do that. That's really positive. We need to have a range of options. So we certainly wouldn't want to be pushing that issue around independence in a sense with young people who are not ready. It's very much about their needs and that assessment and how we support them.
Perhaps to see it more of an independence from and being independent from services, and actually to have a network. It is the resilience that you talk about, actually having people that are able to support you on a whole range of different issues throughout your life, that doesn't require to pick up the phone and phone the council, because actually you've got lots of other people that will designed into your life that can support those issues.
Councillor Knight.
Yes, thank you. That's certainly a very comprehensive report, and there's lots of positives in there, which is good. I do have a question about the fall in the numbers of children and young people in care, which is at item 6. I just want to know, what do you understand as being the drivers for that drop? Because if you look at it one way, if it's because we are better supporting families and making sure that children stay with their family and don't have to go into care, that's a good thing. But if it's a drop because we're not finding the placements in care that those children might need or other factors, then that's not so good. So it's just understanding what the drivers for the drop are, and should we be celebrating or worrying? Thank you.
I think there's a number of aspects to that question. The data would tell us at that time that we were both national and regional. So it was telling us that we had a high number of children and young people in care, and we were seeing that climbing. So there was a lot of question around that. The stability in the in staff across the service has certainly helped to build relationships with children, young people and families. And that has helped in both children coming into care and preventing children coming into care. But it has also helped really children being returned to their families quicker. We've seen a reduction in the number of court proceedings is an example. That's not necessarily because we've had less going into the court arena. What we've been able to do is move those plans on and move things forward. So we've got more timely planning for children and young people. And what we're not seeing is that cohort of young people within the system where we've got a turnover of practitioners. So we're not really clear what the plans are and we're not able to move them forward. Certainly the model of practice, which is a strengths-based model. We know the research and the evidence tells us that working in a strengths-based way does impact. It does work. So there are lots of different factors and components that are making a difference. But certainly, all the indicators will tell us that our numbers of children in the care system were too high, and there was work that we needed to do around them.
Thank you, that's good. Thank you.
You know, well done. No, I think it was right. It was positive. Ross said we're happy. You nearly won an award, got to the final. Good all round, I think. We shall move on then to 6. Virtual school. Karen. And Martin again. That's his better again.
Thank you. I will give a short overview because I'm probably at risk of repeating lots of the conversation that we've already had. But the corporate parenting board provides a leadership role. It really champions the needs of children and young people who are or have been looked after by the local authority. It works with elected members and officers within the council and our partner agencies. On page 5, which is page 47, I believe, of the pack, that outlines really the purpose of the corporate parenting board, which is around listening to the views of children and young people, so that as a council we're able to adapt our corporate parenting in line with their wishes, feelings, and needs. So acting as a forum where children and young people can hold members and officers to account as their parents. It's to raise the awareness of the corporate parenting responsibilities and knowledge among elected members and officers. And it's really to support and make recommendations on matters relating to corporate parenting. Earlier this year, in June and July, a task and finish group was pulled together and worked with young people to really develop the first ever annual report for the corporate parenting board. It's set out around the 8 objectives around the current corporate parenting strategy. I won't, as I say, I'm going to probably repeat myself a lot throughout it, so it is there for your information to consider and for questions. I think we would just say that we are proud to get into the point of having a first annual report where it pulls together the work of the board and more importantly the involvement of children and young people within that work, within the board and within the report itself.
Can I ask the first question? Just for clarification, on page 55, and which is, I don't know if this is Councillor Webb is part of his, it was at the beginning, so I don't know where this falls in. It talks about the corporate parenting, a new corporate parenting strategy but on page 26 of your previous report, it gave the impression that we already got one. Is it just the order that these have been written in rather than?
Apologies, in the previous report, it refers to the priorities in the new corporate parenting strategy. That corporate parenting strategy is due to be presented at executive in February. So it gave an overview and update as to where it's at, but it's not yet finalised and being agreed.
Thank you. If you want it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that all I'd say on this is just, this is our first annual report. Obviously, all councillors have seen this because I know you all read it. I attached this to my executive report back in September, I think it was, because this is something that hadn't really got a clear mechanism within the council to sort of really champion what's going on with our corporate parenting board. And obviously, as elected members and senior officers, we are all corporate parents. And I actually think that this report really highlights the great work that's happened over time. And I know that when we recently sat down with Ofsted that we mentioned earlier on, they really, really liked the work that was going on in the corporate parenting board. And, you know, we've actually progressed the voice of the young person quite dramatically within that board. So, at the last meeting, for the first time ever, we had one of the corporate parenting advisors who's care experienced themselves actually supporting and chairing an item on the agenda. They actually, when this annual report was presented to the corporate parenting board, they chaired the item so that I could present it and then they could organise the scrutiny of it. Yesterday, what day are we on? Tuesday, yeah, yesterday. I sat down with two care experienced young formation as we speak. That really has come out of the voice of young people being strengthened on that board and them feeling like actually they've got a real chance to sort of speak out and you know, talk about the issues that are affecting them and really, really do matter to them. So yeah, overall, and as I said, I know you've read this about 3 months ago, so maybe it's a bit hazy in your minds, but it's a good piece of work. Thanks to officers, but importantly, thanks to the young people themselves who supported it.
Right, Martin.
Yeah, I think just to add, periodically there are a number of events for care leavers, and members will hopefully get invites to those. And if you haven't had them, please let me know, because it means that we're not getting out to all members. They're often at West offices here. It's a really good opportunity to just mingle with some of the care leavers and meet with them. They're fantastic events, and we will increasingly have some celebration events for young people. It's always a balance in terms of too many adults in the room and you know, young people that feel intimidated by that. But I think increasingly I'm really keen that the entire council has the opportunity to function as a corporate parent, every single member right across the council. And I think, you know, you have a role, a fairly unique role that can be used in a whole range of ways, whether you're in a transport committee or whether you're thinking about the budget setting, just to have on the shoulder, just to really to think about what is this policy process, decision making, how does it impact on care leavers? So just a call really for everybody to get involved in some way, shape or form, to be the corporate parent.
That's Martin, thanks. Councillor Webb, anything else to say? Councillor Grosh.
Just super quick, and just on the point that you made, Councillor Webb, about attaching this report to your executive report to council. I know previously there's been conversations about whether or not it should come as its own standalone report, and I just wonder whether, you know, as there are reviews of constitution and how the business of council works, you know, I certainly think it would be a good idea if it came as an annual report to council on its own, you know, to be considered and given the attention that it deserves.
Oh, it's good we agree, Councillor Nichols. I like that. Yeah, I think that it's something that we struggled with this year, didn't we? But I believe we've had conversations with the monitoring officer about how we could update the constitution to fit this. The one thing that I would like to happen is if it does come as its own thing to the annual report is, you know, fair enough. I wrote a bit at the front of it and I am officially chair of corporate parenting board, but it would not be right for it to be me just presenting that because it is the care experience young people, it's the people in the room, the young people in the room. So if we are doing that, my plea would be actually there should be a spot for the young person to present it if they wish. And I think that's something that I think would be a really positive thing to do. And I hope officers can take that away.
If I may, I am totally thinking out loud here, but is it worth us as a committee making that recommendation to A&G or whoever when they're next reviewing the
I don't think
constitution that we would support?
Yeah.
Does anybody object to us making that request? Good. That the annual report, the parenting annual report goes to full council as a report from Councillor Webb, and if any youngsters want to join him, they join him. And that's we come that as a recommendation from this committee. I got that, Reece. Don't forget to put in the minutes. Sorry. Anything else on parenting? Danielle's desperate to get out. Look at her. Thank you. Right, I've got to do something technical before the next bit. Sorry, Karen, it definitely is your go now. We have to consider the exclusion of the press and public from this meeting bit. Virtual school, because it's got some pink paper. Private annex. Do we have to decide or do we just decide?
You just got to approve that it'll be excluded. Just if you consider,
Or if we talk about Annex 1, Annex I, we've got to kick out the public. Does that mean they get switched off as well if they're watching?
It will just if that annex is discussed.
Right. I'm not clear, but hopefully the rest of you are.
Jack, can I recommend, because it's the case studies that are exempt. And so unless anybody wants to raise anything on those issues, I don't think we'd need to go into private session unless there was a question. And so the simplest way to deal with it would be to just at the very end of this session, and if anybody wishes to ask a question, that's the point at which you would go into private session, but otherwise stay in public.
Thank you, Councillor Rush.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. I'm here to bring to you the Virtual School Head Teachers Annual Report for the academic year 2022-23. And also in light of our new elected membership from spring, there's quite a lot of context around the virtual school and the officers who form that part of that work, so that you can understand who we are, what we do, and how we work, and the impact that we are having on our children and young people in care and their outcomes. So I won't read through the whole report for you, but what I did want to highlight is our key priority is to be the education advocate for our children and young people in care, to promote their attendance at school and have high aspirations for them, to ensure that there is a termly personal education plan which is part of the statutory element of the Care Act, that is reviewed by the school, the social worker, and quality assured by the virtual school. We want to make sure we've got educational stability and reduce the number of school moves that our children experience, but also to make sure that our children and young people are in good or better school education, FE college settings. Some of the things that we are compared on nationally is obviously our outcomes at statutory assessment points at the end of early years foundation stage, key stage 1, 2 and 4. So the annexes are all about the data, which I can explain if you need. Martin did give me the tip off and said you might need to explain some of these because a lot of things have changed around the national assessment system in the country, but you've got some benchmark figures, And also really important to point out that when we are comparing our cohorts with our statistical neighbours and national looked after children, the DfE runs reports on children who've been looked after for a 12-month period prior to that assessment period. So you will see an anomaly in the annual report and the cohort sizes to the numbers for whom we are reported against in terms of their outcomes. And but we are actually really proud of what we've achieved in the last 12 months. I very often find that I am working both strategically, leading a team and head of inclusion, at school attendance, school safeguarding, the school wellbeing worker service, and the virtual school head. And our virtual school team is very tiny because we are small and perfectly formed. And I get really stuck in to the day-to-day practice of responding to schools personally, attending PEP meetings, putting in that challenge. And I personally read every single education plan for our children in care. And I don't put my head up enough and look at the outcomes. And I'm really pleased that our outcomes are better than last year on nearly every single measure. I will draw your attention to our Key Stage 2 outcomes, which still need to be improved, but they are improved in individual subject outcomes, reading, writing, maths, but the overall combined needs to improve. And reading dipped this year, maths improved dramatically. What we need to understand is our children are unique. They all have had a different lived experience. My own son is autistic. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Our children in care are absolutely unique. They have their own story to tell. They have their own lived experience in their birth family, in their care experience, in their home scenario with their foster carers or residential provisions, in their school experiences. It is good to look at overall outcomes and trend data, but there is a story behind every single child, which is why I included a very small number of case studies. I could have done 222 for you. And actually one thing that we really should be celebrating alongside the work of Martin and Danielle is actually the fall in the number of children who've moved, the increase in the number of children who have stayed in a stable care, in their home. That makes a difference to our children's outcomes, because we know stable homes built on love, if we've got the care and the stability right, then we are going to be more ready to learn. We are going to be more accessible to new ideas. We're going to do better. So number of placement moves is drastically reducing, and that does have an impact. And you may question why this report contains that context, but it is really important. Linked to our safety valve work as well, we have more young people in mainstream, and we worry about inclusive schools, but actually our young people in care are on the whole in mainstream education, supported. The virtual school pupil premium is not an automatic entitlement to an individual child. We take a graduated approach so that we are responding to need. So some of our children have a much higher allocation from the virtual school to support their stability in education, and other young people in care, a year 4 child who's living with his connected carer aunt has had the care order discharged to a special guardianship today. He's been in the same school since reception through the pandemic. I read his last PEP today, and his outcomes are he's going to exceed age-related expectations. That proves the point. He hasn't had to move. He's with family. We've been responsible for him. We've monitored his education. We've focused on him, and he's got a really good positive future with his connected carer. And that isn't in this overall, year 4 isn't a statutory assessment year group, but I have really high hopes for him when he gets to year 6. He'll be secondary ready. He'll be absolutely grand. That's the work that we do. We know our children really well, because if I was a head teacher and they were all in the room with me, you know, the overall cohort size means that I can know every child's situation. So I will pause there. I'm assuming you've read my report, and I'm conscious of time, but I'm really open to your questions.
Questions?
Councillor Caution. Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for your report. There's lots of real positives in here, like you say. Unfortunately, the nature of the beast is that it's the numbers that sort of jump out that I want to just understand a little bit more. And there's a couple of things which may or may not be linked to each other, and I don't know how much you can talk to them or not. But page 72, there's a great graphic there, and that sentiment about, you know, looking at the behaviour behind, you know, what's behind the behaviour of the child, I think is so important. And that point that you've made about you know, each child being unique. But in the data for suspensions, there does seem to have been a significant jump in the number of suspensions that doesn't seem to reflect the number of children that are getting suspended. And I just wonder whether, and I absolutely caveat this with the sizes of pupil is small numbers of people, so, you know, there can be lots of individual things here, but, you know, are education settings being flexible enough with the children and young people that are clearly experiencing or may have experienced lots of difficult things, trauma, what have you, that may come out in behaviour that is not necessarily wanted? And do they then have the resources to be able to support that young person? Because that big jump to me looks like 1 or 2 children who are perhaps not being supported as well as they maybe ought to be.
Thank you, Councillor Crawshaw. It's the bane of my life, suspensions. However, we are seeing a national increase across the whole education system, and I'm actually quite proud that we only had 26 out of a cohort size of 187 last academic year. The 2019, 21, 22, we had school closures, much smaller class sizes, bubbles, you know, lots of disruption in there. 21, 22, just generally, schools this is the recovery year. 22, 23, we are back to normal. But regionally, in comparison to our regional neighbours, statistically, we are doing really well. We have got such a strong inclusion advisor in my deputy, Dan Bodie. Our fair access protocols, our tight pastoral networks with our secondary schools in particular. But what we are also seeing, as Martin and Danielle alluded to, is as our number of children and young people in care population reduces, the complexity is significant and less hidden. So we do have some increased additionality there for our, 26% of our cohort of education, health and care plans. Some of our young people are really, we are maintaining them in mainstream settings, and we are going to see some buffering up against the system. But we do have a specialist inclusion and wellbeing advisor who responds to every single suspension. And it's never good enough for us, but it is better than it could be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I know the virtual school are relentless at having conversations with schools, making sure that this particular cohort of young people, we do our very best to keep them in a school setting. It is the absolute anchor that can keep a young person both safe, but also feeling supported and a place of feeling of belonging. I think that plays out in the permanent exclusion numbers, which are exceptionally low, one young person. So whilst there are suspensions that are increasing, what I would say is schools are still managing to hold on to huge complexity. We're talking about some young people that have had 30, 32, 34 placements in their care history, very, very complex care histories for some young people. So those numbers really are something to celebrate, I think, by comparison to the complexity. And I guess obviously we've seen that the numbers of children that we're looking after are reducing, which is the right thing to do. What that does mean is that the children that you have got in your system really are at the very top end and the most complex within the entire system in York. If you look at the 34,000 children in York, the 200 and odd that are looked after really are a very small proportion. So in that context, the numbers are really low.
If I may, yeah, the sort of follow on that I just had, which again sort of pings you back to page 68 in the report and paragraph 4.4, and I don't know whether this is me conflating two different things or not here, but seeing that increasing number of children and young people who are finding it difficult to be in that mainstream setting, and I don't know whether that sort of exclusion data is a reflection of some of that as well. But what I was interested in was, because I think that that's the case across the piece, you know, I think all young people well, not all, but a lot of young people are struggling at the moment, irrespective of whether they've previously, you know, had an EHCP or a SEN or a care experience or what have you. And is what you're saying that this cohort is more so, or is it that actually this is that inability or difficulty with the mainstream setting is just a reflection of what's going on for all young people at the moment?
Thank you, Councillor. I think it is a reflection of all young people, which is, I think you've heard from my deputy inclusion advisor, who also leads on the alternative provision directory. Historically, those of you who've been here a long time in York would know that there was no alternative provision other than our Danesgate community, who brokered all of the alternative providers like Toolbox, Ad Astra. Really gutted about that information today, you know, for our young people in the city. And what we've got now is a school system which are holding young people and blending a curriculum offer around them. So our secondary schools and some of our primary schools are working with us to say, actually, this child isn't able to access a full curriculum offer in a mainstream classroom 5 days a week. Can we put in a day of alternative provision that is going to lead to a more positive outcome? And we've started to track that, which is the first time I've managed to get that into the report for you. So you're right to highlight it. All of that is in discussion with the virtual school, with what's the intended impact, and the young person as well. What do you need a break in your week from academia to go to the Joseph Rowntree farm and be with the animals, very in a small environment that's supported and therapeutic, that also leads to a skill and an interest in animal care later in life. That is a way of reducing suspension. And I suspect and hypothesize that if we weren't using as much alternative provision, and it isn't a lot, but as you can see from the table on that page, we would be seeing more children being permanently excluded, repeat suspension, refusing to attend. It's a strategy that we feel is a positive one.
Councillor Cuthbert, something, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this report. I have to say I'm heartened by the work that the virtual school does. Yeah, you know that, but I am. Particularly concerned about the Key Stage 2 results. Having done some invigilating elsewhere in the city during the year, the SATS reading paper was awful, I think is a fair way to describe it. At least that was the experience of the children that I talked to. And the teachers were singularly unimpressed by it. I just wonder if we could do some kind of reading challenge that might work for our special group here. I don't know quite how it could be done, but it couldn't be done at the time of a summer reading challenge. It would need to be scheduled earlier in the year, but I don't know if you've given that any thought.
Thank you, Councillor. I totally agree with you. I think some of our children and young people slipped through that net, and schools were not anticipating them to get 99 as a scale score rather than 100. And I did make that comment in the body of my report about, were things to have been slightly different, our outcomes would have improved across the board. Reading is a key priority for the virtual school. You can see how we've come to fruition in speech language communication in early years already, in phonics outcomes, and it's building up. What we have asked all of our schools to do going forward is for all of Key Stage 2, and that isn't just year 6, but year 3, 4, 5 and 6, to have a identified intended outcome and an aspiration for reading as part of the PEP process.
Yeah, okay, no, I know there's a big limits on what can be done, let alone achieved here, but I've just seems like one of those measures that we could do with giving these young people as much support as we can, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Runciman.
Thanks for your report, Karen, which is always interesting. I want to ask you about attendance. Are you going to try and aim for 95%, or are you going to be content with where you are? And if you are going to, is it certain times of year, certain groups of children that pull the average? Yeah, I thought it might be. Yes.
To have an overall attendance figure for a cohort that is classed as our virtual school is persistently absent from school doesn't sit well with me. However, individual cohorts, 9 children in reception overall, currently to date to the 30th of November, 96%. What brings it down is one child new into care, moved to Northamptonshire with mum, hasn't been allocated to school yet. I've got them straight on the cohort and there's no attendance. A year 11 from the traveller community who does not want to go to school. We've got some alternative provision. We're recording very small percentages of progress, which is fantastic. Our overall cohort numbers are driven down by the very complex at the 15%, 30% attenders, which actually we still celebrate when the previous year might have only been 5%. It doesn't, we had a DFE attendance advisor visit, and we have a termly multi-partnership citywide attendance strategy meeting, which actually takes place tomorrow. And our DFE advisor did say, we overall needs to be above 95, but you can celebrate what was 5% that gets to 20%. But then that's not going to show in the figures. We have some incredible success stories of re-engagement, but they're never going to hit the 90%. So it's absolutely, I would love to see it higher in an annual report, but I can promise you it's heading in the right direction.
Martin with an answer, then Councillor Malley.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we remain hugely ambitious for young people to attend school for a whole range of reasons, and it's not just the maths, English. It really is important in terms of the social education and everything else that you learn when you're around other young people. So we've done a huge amount of work both across education and social care to make sure that we try and move to a position where any young person that has a social worker, that education is a top priority in every single plan, whether it's a child protection plan, child looked after plan, or any other part of the system that we're working with. It's got to be a priority. Attendance is an absolute priority, because to a degree it is a scandal nationally that we've got such a huge amount of young people that aren't able to access the education system. And I say they're not able to access it. It's not always about them not wanting to go. It's the fact that for some young people, it's becoming more complex to access.
Come back briefly, and this is a comment, Karen, it's not a question. I think considering the cohort that you're dealing with, getting up to those figures is pretty good.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, all the statistics provided in the tables all got up to year 11, but in your introduction, you've said that you work with further education colleges. Does the virtual school include 16, 17, 18-year-olds, or does it stop at year 11?
So the pupil premium plus funding for children looked after in education is allocated for age 4 to 15, which is our statutory school age. And with the virtual school and education plans run from age 2, when the term after children turn 2, they are eligible for DFE funded 15 hours of nursery provision, and then the virtual school tracks the educational outcomes all the way through to 18. Our young people in care who are post 16 can opt in or out, and obviously some of them are not in education, they're working, some of them are in apprenticeships and only have 1 day a week release. So the comparators are really difficult to bring into an overall report around PEP completion, because the cohort size might be 40, we've only got 15 PEPs, and that would then lead to actually individual case studies about why. So our comparator year on year from the DFE to other virtual schools is the statutory school age. I'm perfectly willing to have to bring and develop a fuller report for Scrutiny or for our corporate parenting board that focuses from 0 to 18. This is the model I inherited and have continued to operate. That is entirely up to members and what you think would be more appropriate.
Well, I'm not usually on this committee. It's my first time on it, so I don't know anything about this. I don't know what's been scrutinised for, and I don't want to suggest what the committee that I'm not on should look at. But I'm interested, just because I mean that age is when there's a lot more pressure in terms of education. The stakes get higher. People are expected to make, difficult decisions about education, what apprentices, what subjects, things that have, long-term life change decisions that usually parents would support in making those decisions. And also it's a time that there's a lot kind of less support. There's a lot more independence expected in terms of independent studying, and maybe school attendance isn't monitored so much because you're more responsible for your own attendance rather than the school being responsible and that sort of thing. So I'm interested in what support is available at that age, but maybe it just doesn't quite fit within the virtual school. Maybe that sits somewhere else.
Councillor Melly, it really does fit. One of the issues that we do have in terms of the impact that the virtual school can have post 16 and with FE, we don't have the statutory guidance that prioritises care experienced young people. And you're absolutely right, FE colleges have their own attendance policies, have their own exclusion and suspension policies. The virtual school can't challenge those in the same way. And I will hold my hands up and say, to be honest, a lot of this is capacity. I've got a template report. I can manage to do that really well. I spend an awful lot of time getting down with those children's individual plans at post 16 as well. And I would be perfect. I just need to put in more time. If you can find more hours in the working week and year, and we can have a fuller post 16 provision information.
I think it's a really good challenge. And actually that's what Scrutiny is about, to be honest. So I think what we will do is take it away and have a think about it. And mull it over to have a look at what other local authorities do as well. But really good challenge.
Hey, Karen, if you're happy to create extra work for yourself, we'll be happy to read it.
Yes, it's coming back to the issue that Councillor Crawshaw raised at the beginning in terms of the stats on page 72. We've obviously talked about the numbers of our people who've been suffered suspensions. The other noticeable thing in that table is the second line in terms of the total number of days, where there has been a massive jump in the number of days. Now, I'm aware that at least one secondary school in the city substantially upped its disciplinary procedure, both in terms of automaticity, but also the strictness of it. And I wondered if that's a more general trend that is contributing to this. You know, what are the implications for those of our young people who are getting suspended?
You raise a really good point, which is a wicked issue for the education system nationally. We have tariff systems in many schools where, you know, if you are persistently disruptive or disruptive once, you might receive a half-day suspension. The next time you do it, it's a day. The next time it's two days. The next time it's 5. And our children, young people, want to be in school with other children and young people, don't want to be different, and then want to be different. And the number of days lost learning is of significant concern. When a school phones me and says, we've had an incident and it could be a permanent exclusion, I say, can it not be a 5-day suspension, and we can help you work on how we can prevent that. And as Martin said, and as I've already said, every single suspension is heavily scrutinised and challenged, and we still have these numbers. What we need to remember is our cohort is 187, and the number of children and young people who we are responding to on a weekly basis is small. It takes up a huge amount of our time and energy, and we are proud of our results on that. It is, you know, let's go back to what Danielle said. Is it good enough for my child? No, I feel like they are my children. So do my officers in my teams. You know, our hearts sink when we receive that notification or that phone call. I can recognise phone numbers of schools, and I take a deep breath, and then we keep going the next day. But it is a national issue. It isn't just local. It isn't just our looked after children. It is something that we are all grappling with in education at the moment, and as parents.
It's a separate question. It's not a follow. It was really, in terms of the annexes which relate to the performance indicators, it would be helpful if for corporate parenting there could be a description about where the details fit, because there are it's just understanding how this demonstrates relative to Yorkshire local authority and then the region, where the strengths and weaknesses are, because it's not easy to make out where you would like to be versus where you are, or where there is great achievement, and it's just not easy to take on board, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Councillor Worrell. Apologies for that. In each of the annexes that has is entitled a benchmark, we have national looked after children outcomes, our regional Yorkshire and Humber outcomes, our all York children, and our virtual school York cohort. So for each of the measures on any of the pages, if our numbers at the bottom, the last one, the virtual school York, if the percentage is higher than national looked after, the top one, or the region, we're on a win. And then our York school comparator is then there so that we can see what the gap is between children not looked after in York and children looked after. And I would want that to be a small number. That's kind of a really simplistic one, but goes across all of the reports. If there's something more specific, quite happy to talk you through it.
I think these are important statistics to have, and I think if we could receive them at corporate parenting, just with annotation to say this shows positive or, you know, it's just to put that bit of extra information to put it into the text will help to put the figures into context. And I think it would help us as corporate parents to really see the full picture.
Absolutely, I'll take that on board for future and for next week. That the papers have gone out.
Councillor Webb, so then another question from Councillor Crawford.
Yeah, no, I think it's been covered with that. I was going to say, I think be careful what you wish for. Obviously, I think it was this committee that asked specifically for figures from the different data points that you have within children's lives, of which there are many. And this is sort of what it looks like at a very, very, very high level. There's a lot that sits under this. It's a big job of work for Karen to sort of do it for next week, if I'm honest. I'm defending her slightly here. I wonder if for next week, I think it's perfectly fine for maybe for the millions watching next week is corporate parenting. That's what we're talking about, where this report will come again. It might be worth just doing a one-page sort of, this is what figures mean type thing. But then I do think moving forward, as you have a template that you're obviously adding to, just some basics that might be helpful.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, I mean, so this is on these figures, and it may be something again to feed into corporate parenting board, or possibly to come back here, or otherwise I'm not sure. But I'm just looking at the Key Stage 4 Progress 8 figures, which are page 93. And again, I'm going to caveat this with the cohort in York is 12 versus the cohorts in regional or national being significantly higher. But the Progress 8 scores are negative for all but the overall picture for all of York's schools. And I assume in some respect that is the impact of being care experienced and you know what that means for your education. But on the face of it, at least, actually, if you are care experienced, you're worse off going to a school in York than you are going to a school regionally by almost half a grade. And for anybody who doesn't know, the -1 means you're a grade lower than you would have been had you been in a different setting. And so obviously another, well, 1.4 is essentially your -1.4 on where you would have been. As I say, I caveat that with a different 12 pupils, it might have been plus 1.4 potentially. But, you know, as a committee or as a council, you'll know the individuals here. Should we be worried actually that we're below the regional average, or is it just a case of a statistical anomaly? And perhaps in terms of monitoring going forward, it might be helpful to have not just this year's figures, but actually this is where they were last year, this is where they were the year before, so that if there's a continual case of it being always a half a grade lower than region, then we know we've got something to worry about. If it's up and down, it's perhaps a bit more.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Crawshaw. I absolutely agree. And Martin did ask me to have some trends. The timing of the committee means we actually haven't got them yet as validated. So I could only put in the benchmarks, which are to help us with that. I mean, I'm actually quite pleased with our Key Stage 4 outcomes this year in comparison to the year before. But progress at Key Stage 2, progress at Key Stage 4, when we look at those progress marks, is a concern. And that's where our challenge in terms of aspirations and our schools to be able to pick up that baton is a key area of our work all the time. So what we have commissioned for this year as a pilot to see what difference we can make is a retired teacher of secondary English as a progress leader, 45 days for the year to solely focus on Key Stage 4, actually reaching the young people who we're not getting contacted about who are causing issues, to the hidden young people who schools tell us through the PEPs they're doing okay, they're meeting, you know, they're going to get their grades, and then they don't. So we're trialing that as a strategy this year to really get in there and say, but can we have a look at what's going on in the classroom? Can we see if we need to, you know, an additional intervention? Are you really tracking? Have you really got the right aspirations? And can these children make accelerated progress to be even more secure at the end of Key Stage 4 of a positive destination post-16? There is absolutely a story behind every young person. And more importantly for me than the Key Stage 4 outcomes are what's the destination and how are we sustaining that, so that we're either in a secure apprenticeship or we're in employment or we're on an FE skills or A-level academic course to actually move on to our success in life. For some of our young people, because of their lived experiences, Key Stage 4 is too much and it crashes. And then we pick it up and we keep going and we keep supporting our young people to achieve when they're ready, which is why you'll see that, you know, we've got some graduates at age 24, not 21, because it's the journey as much as it is the destination. And these snapshot moments in time are difficult for some of our young people.
I absolutely take that. And you know, as a slight aside, I read a really interesting study the other week comparing European countries where the rates of mental health difficulties and self-harm and things like that in young people correlated with at what point in their education career did they have some kind of key exam. And so in the UK, it tends to be 15, 16. In other European countries, it's maybe more 17, 18, because that's the point at which you hit that more critical stage. So, you know, that's just something for us all to reflect on. Just with these stats though, and I guess the next sort of question for me around them, I'm quite skeptical of SATs. I'm quite skeptical of lots of the ways in which we monitor children's progress. So it's really good to hear you talking about the outcomes and you know, where they go next and all of those sorts of things. But Ofsted and lots of our scrutineers do look at all of these figures and all of this data. And the thing that I suppose would worry me, there's two parts to it that would worry me. One is actually the Key Stage 2 stats I don't think are particularly great, and that's where the Progress 8 is based on. So if you're already not performing particularly well and then you're not performing even worse, are we hiding a potentially bigger problem? But also presumably there's actually quite a significant change in the cohort between the point at which they do their Key Stage 2 stats. It's not the same children that you're then comparing at the end of Key Stage 4. And so how do you sort of account for that within your reporting, and so that we all can understand, you know, what's going on? Well, yeah, no, I appreciate it's slightly a rhetorical question.
It's virtually impossible because it isn't tracking. You're right, Councillor Crawshaw, it doesn't necessarily track the same children from the end of Key Stage 2 to the end of Key Stage 4, because our aspiration is for permanence for children and young people, and some of those young people may not be in the cohort, which is why the only comparator we've got is those who've been in care for a 12-month period prior to the assessment. We're not tracking a cohort from Key Stage 2 to GCSE because it might not be the same young people. We can go back and look, but it isn't accounted for in that report. It is the benchmark data.
Sorry, just super quick.
I've got one.
Is there any equivalent then? Because I know with free school meals, there's ever 6, isn't there? So if you have ever been in receipt of free school meals, you can see what impact that had on your education career. And I appreciate there's a whole complexity around data protection and you know, identification and all of that. But at the same time, if you've had a period in care and your care experience, that will have an impact across your entire life, actually. Because what we want to know is that we're doing everything we can for those young people who have that experience, even if it's only for 6 months or.
Sorry, just before you answer, I just add to that, because it just something I picked up is you've been there since 2018 and you said you know the kids. So is this, and like I said, the statistics only show the previous 12 months, is there children that are in from when you was there in 2018? So while you're not reporting on it directly, you would know that that child has achieved something that without your great work here, they would never have achieved. I know from my wife's a teacher, she comes home, she gets the results every year, and a kid who got a D, she knows that's a hell of an achievement. It shows no achievement in her work, except she knows that child is now going to achieve something. So is there kids that you know that do stay throughout the system that actually, whether there is a mechanism, you could create something, actually that's what we should be looking at rather than numbers. So yeah, I mean, Mike wants to say something, you can say something before we start creating more work for you.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think just to try and answer the first question in some ways, I think looked after children just simply aren't a homogenous group. You know, every single one is so different in terms of their experience, whether there has been neglect in their life, whether they've come into care at the age of 2, whether they've been with a family member, whether they've come into a stranger foster carer arrangement, whether they end up in residential, whether they stay in the city or they end up in Birmingham. There are so many different things, I think, that influence this group of young people that are so different. In many ways, the statistics are, in my view, not very helpful. I think in what you've described, you know, that I think on an individual basis, we need to try and, as much as we can, get to every single young person, which to a degree is, I think, what you're saying, to understand their journey. And actually, have we been able to influence change in the period of time that we've been involved in their life? I think that's much more complex. But you know, some young people come into the care at the age of 15. Some young people come into care 5 days before they're doing the GCSEs. Others come into care at the age of 2. It's such a different group, really. And some years, to be really frank, you're sort of going to be lucky. You're going to get a cohort of young people that just happen to have been engaged in education fairly well, and other years you're going to get a group that is going to be much more challenging. And I think you'll see this data change at every local authority level. It will change significantly, and it's a challenge for every virtual head in the country, I think, that can end up pulling the hair out, getting too much in the detail. That said, we've got to have something that benchmarks, that creates an ambition for us. I think that's why you've included the case studies, to try and give you a sort of sense of the work that's been done. I think there's probably some work for the corporate parenting group to go a bit deeper into this over time.
Yeah, if I can just jump in there, I think, this is a tricky one, because I think what Councillor Crawshaw said earlier about the progress 8 is obviously young people do their SATs at the end of Key Stage 2, so when they're in year 6 at the end of primary school, and that data is then used to determine what they should get with a fair wind and a fine day when they are 16. And obviously, as anyone remotely in education knows, that that's a very, very loose science. I'd almost go as far as saying it's an art. And I think that that is a challenge, and particularly when we're talking about 12 young people. If you're looking at those Key Stage 4 numbers, but within that 12, you need 1, maybe 2 young people to have an off day, or indeed not turn up for an exam, and that can have a big impact on these figures. So I think we should take that with a pinch of salt. But I think from a corporate parenting point of view, because it is 12 young people, actually, we should be able to actually talk to those young people, or get anonymized case studies about those 12 individuals and look at what their journey was. And maybe what might be more useful is if we could, have a conversation about those 12 young people and say, well, actually, this young person did come into care only 5 days before, or this person was with us for the whole of their secondary career, or actually, this person is an unaccompanied asylum seeker and they've just arrived in the country. It could be any number of different situations. So I think that might be more useful than the Key Stage 4 data in particular. So I wonder if longer term, and I mean longer term, Karen, not like for next week, we want to have a look at how that might work instead, because I think that would be probably more useful for everyone here, and probably more useful for the young people in the education settings as well, to actually, you know, because there's also, we should remember that this is a cohort of young people that probably more than any others, when they get past 16, when they get past that GCSE point, they don't necessarily stay within the school. Where obviously an awful lot of our young people in the city stay on to sixth form or go to college or whatever it is. But this group, that can be more challenging. So actually really taking the opportunity to go, right, let's take stock of our young people, and let's see what their journey's been like when they get to that point, so that for the next young person, we can maybe tweak and change and improve. That might be more beneficial for them, for the schools, for us as an authority and corporate parents. Them's my thoughts. Sorry.
Some thoughts and questions for you there.
Lots and lots of questions there, and lots to take away. So I thank Scrutiny for that challenge. And there are some young people, and certainly Ofsted a year ago, more than a year ago, asked that very question when I was looking at education plans for Key Stage 4. He said, can we look at, you know, what outcomes did they get at Key Stage 2? Is this education plan aspirational enough? And how do you know whether the school is targeting the right outcomes? And our mantra is absolutely on the PEP to make accelerated progress, to go beyond age-related expectations where possible. And I personally have the ability to change the predicted and target grades. And so if a school secondary puts in a grade 3 as a target for maths, I'll change it before I finalise the PEP and send it back to them and say, why not a 4? And then individual young people's stories are, you know, tracked and prioritised. And that is our aim. But I think Councillor Webb's right. For Corporate Parenting Board, there are other young people. There were 24 young people in year 11 by the end of July, but only 12 who've been looked after for more than 12 months prior to taking GCSEs. And the virtual school picks up all of those, supports the school, tries to get those young people into their exams, tries to put last minute tuition in to support and try and pick things up when the world has just crashed and a young person has signed themselves into care or a family has rejected them. Some of those things aren't as explicit and covert, but that is what we're doing on a day in, day out basis.
Any more questions? Cool. Thanks, Karen. We'll try not to add too much to your workload for next time. Work plan, item 8. I've written something. We've got one addition that was voted on at the last full council, where we was asked to look at York City's community involvement. And to be fair, the motion actually had a time limit on it. I discovered last Monday a different scrutiny that too many motions don't appear to be picked up at all. And they're just lifting. The last one was time limited. So looking at what we've got going forward, we've only got 3 meetings left before the end of the year, council year. We can slip it in April. I think January is not leaving enough time for anything to be prepared. March, we've already got 4 reports. So are we happy with April? We'll have a culture month in April, because we've got theatres and what was YMT again? York Museum Trust. We've got the York Museum, York Theatre and football. So I think that's definitely culture month. And it's a broad spectrum of culture.
So is that a little more worse than just culture?
It's all culture. I'm sure there's a lot of culture in York City. So I'll add that one. Now, going back to earlier, was talking about budgets, and did you want to know more about the housing and where we fit that in? Councillor Lodge got a suggestion?
It went, not really a suggestion, but I think that in the past there's been an opportunity when something like this to maybe work with some members from this committee might work with some members from housing committee to look at the housing strategy that we want to implement over the next year, I suppose. And it's just a thought around that what I wouldn't want to do is have something that came to this scrutiny committee because it's got children's in it, and then have to go to the housing scrutiny committee because it's got housing in it, when actually we probably need a bit of expertise from both committees. So it's just a point that maybe it doesn't need to go on this work plan specifically, but it might be a piece of work that you might do subcommittee with another group.
I think that's the road we should go down, because I think our agenda is full enough without adding housing into it. So is anybody going to put the hand up? Would like to go work with housing? Everyone sits on their hands now. Oh, thank you, Councillor.
No. It's a question hand, not a statement time, Chair. Are you proposing setting up a working group? Reporting back to both committees? Okay.
But just maybe confirm with Martin sort of timings around this, because I don't want to do things too soon. I don't want to do things too late. I think pre-decision scrutiny on anything is probably a better way to go, but we might be pre-decision yet. So when's an appropriate time?
Come on, Martin, help us out.
The next financial year, I think in reality. I think the difficulty is, so this isn't a subject that isn't being covered by housing scrutiny. I know it is because I've seen it in a report. Be assured that it's questions that are being asked elsewhere. But I do think it's probably an important point to, sort of from an officer perspective, there's been a huge amount of work that's clashed for a whole range of committees that have come up to this month. And actually there's been, one of the reports tonight, you saw that has been written very specifically for the scrutiny committee rather than scrutinising work that's being done. What I don't want to do is end up producing a load of work for officers at a time that is very challenging. So what I would say is, I think Councillor Webb described the fact that there's some work being done on a improved pathway, and I think it's that bit of work that needs to be scrutinised, because that will describe what the future looks like for housing in York. So I would suggest it's probably early in the new year, early in the new financial year. It probably makes sense for members to come together during that time to at least have some oversight of what's happening. But I think anything coming back to scrutiny would be next year, which is beyond this work plan.
I'm just wondering if the way to deal with it then is for yourself as chair to have a conversation with the chair of the housing scrutiny as to what work they've done. If we can kind of keep a note somewhere on here of this as being a topic of potential future interest, I'd be a bit wary of setting up any further task and finish groups when we've already got 2 up and running as we are, and noting the points that have been said there. And if something was to come to housing scrutiny in between now and us next looking at it, there's always the opportunity potentially for committee members to submit questions via the chair or the chair of that scrutiny committee to be asked, because that's the point, isn't it, is to be able to get the answers to the questions rather than necessarily for us all to sit here and talk till gone 8 o'clock in the evening. So to my mind, having it as a topic of interest to perhaps come back in a month's time just with a yes, I've had a conversation and this is what's happening.
Yeah, unless one wants to disagree, I think it's the best way forward. I'll talk to the chairman of housing scrutiny. We will want to talk about it at some point. It's just finding out the right time. So as Martin says, we're not wasting our officers' time and our own time unnecessarily. So I'll have a chat. The next Any urgent business? Good. Meeting close at 8:05. Thank you very much, everybody. Another long meeting, but I always do